All right, it is time to start my first experiment for my asymmetry project with my warp chains. As I mentioned, I am warping from back to front. So here we are at the back of the loom, and you can see that I've got, and I'll zoom the camera back in a second. You can see that I've got my warp chains on my leaf sticks. This floppy one down here is the other leaf stick. So why would I choose to warp back to front, you ask? Especially when my loom, a shaft loom, is really designed for front to back warping. Well, here's why. The color pattern, the warp color order for this project is starting at one side, it is 80 ends. Actually, I'm going to start from the other side because it's easier to see where the colors are darker. It's 30 ends, then it's a stripe of the black of 10 ends, a stripe of the white and 10 ends, repeated 3 times, then a stripe in red, 10 ends with white, and then dark gray, and then you get to light gray, and then again, alternating in stripes of 10, and then it ends with 80 ends of the bleached. And this is all 8-2 cotton. So if I warped from front to back. So what I did when I wound this warp chain is these first 30 ends, I just held single. I only had one cone of this yarn, and so I just held them single and I warped 30 ends. But when I reached the striped sections in the middle, I held one end of each color together and wound enough for the stripe of 10 in the color and the stripe of 10 in the black. Now, what that means is when you get into the cross and you start slaying your reed, you have to count. You have to slay the 10 black ends, and without losing the cross, also slay the 10 white ends next to each other. And I know for a fact that when I have to count in my reed, because I have real difficulties with figure ground differentiation, that I would be really likely to mess this up and or lose the cross or have some other difficulty happen. So because I chose to wind the chains this way, it is actually going to be easier for me to thread the heddles, I hope, with in these two threads held together sections, that I can just skip 10 heddles more easily and just push them off to the side until I need them. Skip 10 heddles more easily than I could count spaces in my reed. So that was actually the biggest uh, part of my decision making. Was it's just so much harder for me to see the reed than it is for me to see the heddles, that this is how I'm doing it. So the green strings that you can see here are my counting strings, and they help me keep track because I tried counting while I was winding, and it went pretty well this time. I did not have any major screw ups. But there's an added advantage in that right now, these counting strings aren't going to move without great difficulty. And I mean great difficulty. So now that I'm at the back of my loom, and let me show you what the whole setup looks like. I got my leaf sticks tied to, this one goes to the castle, this one goes to the rear beam. Then I've got my apron bar attached to the warp beam of the loom, and I've got my raddle all set up. And here is my warp beam. You can't see it, it's under the rear beam, but everything is put together. So normally when weaving teachers tell you to warp from back, show you how to warp from back to front, they would have an extra apron rod, and they would run that extra apron rod through these two sets of loops and then tie that holder apron rod to the one that's attached to the warp beam. And that's how I've always done it. But when I warp from back to front, but it's caused problems. So when I had my problematic warp for the double width, double weave blanket, It was because there was, once this counting string is off, there's nothing to keep these warp ends from sliding around on the holding apron rod or apron bar. So that caused significant problems on my last project. Now, when I warp from front to back, and again, this might sound really familiar to you, uh, normally you would cut your warp chains at the back, and then one way to attach them to the apron bar on the warp beam is to tie them into big-ish knots and then tie, or in my case, use these tie-up cords, which I like using because they're all the same length. Then connect the knots with these tie-up cords. So what I'm going to try right now, and this is a little scary, so bear with me, is cutting this exactly in half, cutting my warp chain exactly in half, and then knotting it to one apron rod instead of trying to keep everything from sliding around. So I'm just cutting it, and then, and this is a nice, this will create a nice big knot. I'm just going to tighten an overhand knot near the end, and I don't really need this cross marker anymore. Tighten the end, tighten it up, and then I'm just going to wrap the loop of this tie-up cord fairly loosely, or actually fairly tightly, around the knot. And that's going to hold everything in place. Let's try it on this one. And if this doesn't work, well, lesson learned. But once I remove the counting string, I'll have a lot more leverage to play and spread these ends out. So I'm just grabbing another tie-up cord and looping it around the end a couple of times, because I really, what you absolutely positively do not want is for one of these knots to come loose from its lashing cord, because then you have a whole section of your warp that has come undone. It's at a different tension from everything else. Let's do this next one. Wow, this is really scary. It'll be okay. And even if my great plan here doesn't work, I'll be able to figure out a way to make it all copacetic again. So and connect a knot to my warp beam. There goes the camera. Connect a knot to my warp beam. And now I am ready to undo my counting strings and to spread out my warp in the raddle, and then to beam the warp. So remember, the job of the leaf strings is to keep the cross and to help kind of comb through the ends so you don't end up with a big tangle. And the job of the raddle is to rough slay. So when I start spreading out the warp in my raddle, I know that my weaving width is close to 16 inches. So I will count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'll verify this by looking at the pattern again before I start spreading it out. And I'll start this end of the warp chain will start in this section or thereabouts. And I will try to go across. Oh, the other reason I chose to warp back to front is that this reed gets flayed 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1 because I'm working at 18 ends per inch on a 12 dent reed. So in addition to having to have all 10 of my black ends together and then all 10 of my white ends and so on, I would also have to slay the reed at 2 1 2 1, and that would just, my brain just cannot cope with that. So I'll do all the work at the back of the loom here. Then I will thread my heddles, and then finally I will slay my reed. And the whole time, these leaf sticks are going to be back here helping me keep track of the cross. So that's my reasoning. Let's see how well it works out when I uh, get the warping finished.